My microphone. Welcome everyone to today's show. My name is Anthony Barocas. I'm the Chief Gearhead here at StreamTek, and I welcome everyone to today's mobile, not really mobile, different location. I'm on a trip, but I wanted to do live shows with you as always every week. So today I have a special guest with us, Joe DeMax. DMax? Oh, he'll tell us. He's nodding. I can see him nodding. Not from Central Control. I can't say it's from Central Control. Central Control came from him, so he is Central Control. But also, I want to welcome everyone who is joining us for today's show. And as always, I'd love to know where everyone is watching from. And so we got a couple people jumping in already. Andreas jumping in from Greece. And Andreas was with me this morning when I was talking with Dan from Bird Dog. And so thank you for coming back again to the show. We also have OM VidTech from Washington, D.C. Kirk is letting us know that the test is received in Dallas, Texas. I know where you are. And the McGee Academy of Arts and Sciences Broadcasts is saying hello from California. Mike Sabatini is in LaSalle, Illinois. And OM VidTech is, I'm curious about Meld Studio. We'll have to figure out what that is. But today I will be talking with Joe from Central Control about the software, what it can do for you, and really how it can help your projects, your productions, the different things that you work on, because Central Control is sort of like digital glue, as I would say. But now it's also in this latest iteration. It's just growing in terms of capability, functionality, and I could blather on for quite some time, but I think a better solution would be to bring Joe on. Because, I mean, you know, from its humble beginnings, like when you first started doing Central Control, what was the idea? I needed something to do something, right?
That is correct. One of the things I thought I might use it for was focus control, as the autofocus is failing me. But no, I started this back in 2020. I had a load of small applications I'd built to do various tasks. I had some old TriCaster control panels that I really wanted to use with vMix. I built a small tool to do that. And then I'd build like a small tool to let me use like a Behringer X Touch with my TriCaster and so on and so forth. And I released some of these, and it just became apparent that if it was all in one application that would let the user, you know, kind of set that up, and it was modular, it might be a useful product. So I released the first version a couple months after starting the project, and just kept adding these different integrations in, and just kept building it to what people were asking for.
So in terms of like where Central Control has gone, you're saying that that's really user driven.
Certainly, absolutely, yes.
Because I know a lot of times, you know, as a creator, you're sort of like, I feel this would be the best thing. You have an idea. And at the same time, you'll have a user base that say, we actually want this. And it's in a different direction than where you want to go.
Yeah, and some of them are just like, we would like a module to be able to control this device. There's not going to be any great controversy there. It's like, if the demand is there, I'll do it. And then there's other bits, you know, like the more advanced functionality it's grown to have. That's where there's certainly some discourse, and well, you've made this work like this, but perhaps it should work like that. And those developments are possibly more interesting. Yeah.
Right, because now, in addition to being digital glue, making this control surface work with that software, or this one control surface talk to three different things, you now have it where it's now its own thing. It's a signal generator and it's other tools. It's not just glue.
Yeah, and this all just came from, I didn't stop doing my own productions, and these ideas just all came from, we were shooting a tutorial video, and me and my friend Ollie were shooting this video, and we couldn't find a teleprompter we liked that did kind of everything.
Oh, I lost your audio.
You lost my audio?
Oh, now it's back again. Yeah,
Oh,
it
I
just
might be. I might be gated. I'll keep closer. But no, we're shooting this video and we needed a teleprompter. We couldn't find one we liked, so we built our own teleprompter to use for our own productions.
So if you were to list out the 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 things that it does from within itself, not the digital glue part, but the thing that it does within itself, what would be the key features you would reach out to people?
I'd say the teleprompter is a big one. I think there's loads of other bits that probably are on the fringes of being digital glue. So there's this timeline interface that lets you program, like, what we might call a macro, rather than being a list of commands. It's a timeline that is a central control exclusive. But it's utilizing all the integrations that have been added to the application just in a different way. There's there's a kind of basic rundown system, and that is, I guess, it's a standalone. It could be a standalone product, but again, it can leverage all the integrations that already exist. So if you want an event in that rundown to trigger something, you can. And then people will occasionally ask, why don't you release this standalone? And it's because the value is because within central control, it can talk to everything else that's already there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I actually, as a content creator and doing my own show, the timeline interface that you came up with, I think is rather brilliant. I'm just going to throw that out there. And for full disclosure, I invited Joe on here. Joe graciously agreed to be on here. There's no money exchanging hands, for the FTC and all that stuff. And actually, Joe was one of the sponsors of my 100th episode, and he gave away a copy of Central Control. So again, thank you for that. But I just wanted to be clear that, like, as a content creator, it's something to, a macro is one thing, but the timeline is just sort of like macro but polished.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of the idea was, let's go to the world of non-linear editing, a timeline interface, something we're all should be very familiar with in media, and we'll steal the best ideas from that, and try and apply it to live production. And the result is it's this tool where you can build quite a complicated sequence quite easily by just dragging and dropping actions onto a timeline, and then if something happens too late, you just move it to the left, or if it happens too early, shift it to the right. It should be very familiar to anyone in media.
Now, here's an interesting, and I want to reiterate to people who are watching live, throw questions into the comments. We're live on Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So if you're watching this, feel free to throw your questions into the comments so that Joe and I can both see them. But I actually have a question first. Years ago, there was this product that it was actually script-based. And you would write a script, and then in the script, you would put, okay, and here's where I want the video to happen, and here's when I want the title to come up. And it was actually like, so as you were reading the script, these things would just trigger automatically, but it was all anchored to the script. Is that something that you have considered?
When you say script, are we talking about like
for the prompter? The actual teleprompter. So as the person's reading, and they say, "So let's take a look at that video now," and it'll actually trigger the dissolve, trigger the playback, trigger the mute the microphone, and all these things.
Yes, yeah, no, that is in central control, and it's a perfect example of why it was just added as a module to central control rather than a standalone product, because by virtue of it being a module, we can talk to our switcher, graphics system, audio. Yeah, I've got a demo of that if you'd like to see it.
Hey, speaking of demo, hey, let's go right to that. I've got that queued up right here. So tell us what we're looking at before we dig in.
Yep. So here I've got my vMix project. This is this is pretty much it's the Central Control Roadshow. This is what went to IBC. And I've also got Central Control running here. This is our project. I'd say it's a mildly complex one. We've got all our modules. We can talk about that later. But the one of interest now is we've got our teleprompter. Now, this teleprompter is slightly different to others in that it actually reads its script from a Google Doc or a Word document. So you don't need to learn a new editing program. But anyway, talking of the automation, I'm just going to hit play on this script, and we're scrolling down through our script, and it's time to roll our VT. And here we go. We can see it's rolling our VT. It also knows how long is left in the clip, so the talent's never guessing. And I'm just going to drag ahead in the clip a bit. Here we go. We are 10 seconds remaining. And as we come out of this, the automation is going to take us out. And there we go. I'm back on camera. Okay, that was terrific. Great video. Here's what's coming up at this year's IBC. So yeah, we can do that kind of complex automation just straight from a teleprompter script. So you can, you know, if you've got a live to tape piece that you do every day, you could build it out in the prompter. The top of the script could start the recording, do all your automations in the middle, like rolling video clips, so on and so forth. And then the end of the script could then end that recording, and you'd have a file that was ready to go.
Basically, you know, soup to nuts, just done.
Yep. No need to even top and tail if you get it right.
That's the key thing. That is the key thing, getting it right.
Yeah.
Now, on the bottom right, it actually looks like that's the timeline.
It is. It is. I've also prepared a demo for that. So this is, we call this Flex Macros, right? And this is our timeline-based macro editor. So here's one I built for IBC. I like to organize these, and I've got all my track names. So this is like what each track's doing. So I say, let's just make this a tiny bit smaller, and let's have a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to hit play. Here we go. The intro is rolling. The music is playing. You probably can't hear the music. Here we go.
We can hum along with it.
See it coming along, and we're going to fade out the music, do a little camera sweep. Our first graphic is in. Little zoom push on my camera. My graphic is in. Take it out. Music's been completely faded down. And, you know, if I was a one-man band TD, my chances of getting this right every day,
zero.
I'm not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. But I can, you know, I would say I spent 20 minutes building this in the timeline. And now if I've got a show that I need to do every day, it's done. I could just, from one button, I can launch this whole sequence and kind of get the same thing right every time.
And I think that's where software like this, the automation part, gives you the network polish through the fact that you can, you know, go through this and fine tune it. You know, you've got the pan happening between A and B, and then you've got the zoom push between your preset 1 and 2 and things like that. And you're just calling the devices and telling them what to do at the right time, which is where, like you said, if you've got the timeline and you watch it, you say, oh, if it came in a little earlier, that would be nice. Or if my lower third came in after the push ended, you could just slide them in the timeline. And
exactly.
that's why I said I think the timeline is just butter.
Yeah, I quite enjoy using it. Like I find it quite a creative process to, you know, just like finesse those moves and maybe drag something a hair earlier, and just I can like sit there for a long time if I really want, and just keep playing it back to just get it absolutely perfect.
We have a comment in here, and a person asks, it's a vMix centric application or stream? It's actually not. It has almost nothing to do with vMix, because as far as I know, you could use whatever tool you wanted, as long as it has, like you could be using a TriCaster, you could be using, you know, other software tools, or you could just be using all hardware.
Yes, yeah, no, certainly. I'll say it off the bat, I'm a mega vMix fan. I'm sure you are too. But the goal of this was to be as modular and, you know, open-ended as possible. And to that effect, I'm just scrolling now. This is the add device window. This is where I can add modules into my project. And you can see we got these categories. So in video mixes alone, I've got 8M. I've got Director Mini. I think you've used that one. TriCaster, OBS, the Osee product, the GoStream Deck, Roland, Ross Carbonite, vMix, Wirecast, Livestream Studio, and VisVector. So it is not vMix centric. It's just I'm a big fan of vMix, and it's a good way to demo the tool.
And I think you're close to having 200 different modules at this point.
I think the count's around that, yeah.
So, and just to be clear, a module is a connection to something.
Yes, a module could be any number of things. So in central control, it could be a hardware control surface, like a MIDI controller, a StreamTek, an X keys. We support nearly every X keys ever made. Or it could be a device that we wish to control. So a TriCaster, vMix, a replay system, mixer, lighting console. And in addition, a module could also be one of our own internal tools, like the teleprompter or the timeline macro system. Yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of cameras, is there a module for each camera, or do you basically call NDI camera?
There's some news there. So this is the current version. I'll read them off. We've got modules for IDA cameras, Panasonic, PTZ optics, and in addition to that, there is an NDI PTZ control module, which is a great catch-all. Like most cameras that have any camera with NDI will do NDI PTZ. And then in just a couple of weeks, there's going to be a generic module for both Sony Visca UDP and TCP. So we should be pretty well set with that combination of modules to control most cameras.
Okay, and then to clarify, so if you bring up the generic NDI controller, then within that you're going to select any number of 30 different cameras.
Yep, I can. I'm using the NDI PTZ module right now. When you saw those zoom pushes, we were setting this up before IBC. We didn't know what cameras we were going to have when we landed in Amsterdam, but we knew they'd have NDI, so it was all set up. And then when we got to the show, we just, there's a drop-down menu. I see all my NDI sources, my cameras, select the right ones, and we're away.
And that's the nice thing about NDI is that because it is an interoperability standard, you don't have to sit there and say, oh, I don't have the PTZ optics driver. No, if it's NDI, it's like, okay, it's here, and then the PTZ controls are there, the tally is there, and everything. And that is, I think, one of the advantage of going with an IP camera. But I know there are people, like you said, that still using Visca and other protocols for control as well.
Yeah. I'll say also another benefit of NDI, and I've used this myself many times, is NDI Bridge. The PTZ controller, it all still works. It's all there if you're utilizing NDI Bridge for remote productions as well.
The OM VidTech jump back in and says, "Oh, great! I do have a TriCaster," and that's what I really wanted to call out. Is that this is I know you're in England, and we have Elmer's glue. It's white glue. It's supposed to stick anything together, and that's one of the key things with this is it's not platform specific. It's not a specific switcher. It's not a specific camera. It's not a specific software. It's basically whatever you want to connect. And if there isn't a module, you have a process for saying, what about this one?
Yeah, and a lot of it is based on demand. There's a very healthy Facebook user group community that will suggest stuff, and it's if there's enough interest in that particular integration, more than likely it will happen. Yeah. There's also, of course, there's generic modules which can talk to just about anything for basic protocol conversion tasks. Like I want to convert MIDI to OSC, you can do that. Or if you want to talk to something that has a simple HTTP API, there's a generic module for just fire and forget sending those commands. So it's pretty capable in talking to things that it doesn't even have a module for yet.
And I think that's one of the key things too, is that when I was writing the description for the show, is that you can also fire off DMX commands. So now you're talking to lighting instruments. So you can have somebody using this that isn't even doing video production. They could literally be doing like a live stage show where, hey, look, here's the text for the prompter for the person speaking on stage, maybe at the UN, and they need a teleprompter that works. And
Yeah.
and you want the lighting to change, and you need, other things to happen. And people could utilize this in ways that weren't necessarily even envisioned.
There is a large venue in my hometown that uses this, and they use it to control their lighting console and Resolume Arena, which is like a VJ software, from a pair of MIDI keyboards, believe it or not. But they've got in the middle of the room, they've got a mirror ball on a DMX winch, and there's a Monday night, which is a very student orientated night, and there's this moment in the night where they'll play Dancing Queen by ABBA, and they've got this one button that's built on the timeline that will do this dramatic sequence on the lighting. It will tell the Resolume what visuals to put up, and there's this dramatic sequence as the mirror ball is lowered above the dance floor, and that's all programmed in the timeline in central control. And then it gets triggered from, you might have seen them, the X keys, big one button things. They've got one of those. And when they hear that first bit of Dancing Queen, someone smashes that button, and this all just it's a sight to behold. I wish I had a video of this.
Well, that's something to bring to the next show.
Yeah.
So now you talked about working with vMix, and you were with the vMix team at IBC, which just happened a week ago in Amsterdam. And for those that don't know, IBC is the International Broadcasters Convention, and it's in Europe, because there's lots of broadcasters in Europe and everything, and the Middle East, and that's where it's more convenient for them. NAB in Las Vegas is convenient for, obviously, the US broadcasters and things like that. So there's different audiences, and how do different audiences come to software like this? How do you see it being used differently in different places?
Certainly. There's, I think the primary audience is like, medium-sized productions, often like one-man band shows. There's a lot of tooling in this that helps them. And you do get, since I'd say 2020, it's kind of been open season for large-scale broadcasters using tools that they traditionally might not have, like vMix and Central Control. There is a broadcaster in the UK that does a segment on their news channel. Can't say who it is, but they do it. They basically have it all scripted in the teleprompter, and they use Central Control and vMix. It's basically the example I gave earlier. They do exactly that. So it really, truly, it kind of blows my mind how great the range is between different users of Central Control.
And honestly, we call it, looking like broadcast. And, it's an aspiration of, people who are getting into the field to, attain that polished look and have those dynamic moves and things like that. And this makes that possible easily. Yes, you do have to put the time in the first time and get all the presets and the timeline just right, but then it just becomes repeatable, and then you can make it more complex. You add a little bit of nuance, you add a little bit more icing onto the cake and things like that. But I think at a certain point, to say like, well, broadcasters are using this too, because there's not really a level above that. Like when you get to that level, we're all operating at this nice polished delivery. That's the level that we want to attain, and you can attain that, getting into this, and you can attain that at that level too. It's just they used to do it using multiple operators. Somebody on playback, somebody on graphics, somebody on camera one, somebody on camera two, somebody on lighting board, and everything like that. But now with the ability to have all these devices talking to each other through the network, the automation makes things super easy.
Without a doubt, and there's an ever-growing demand for more channels, fast channels, more content to YouTube, and we're a big broadcaster. Maybe we're not going to build a massive $1 million plus production control room for every extra fast channel we need to build. It's not viable. And they, I think, started delving into these sort of tools like central control when they had to in the COVID 2020, and then thought, oh, maybe there's something in this.
Yeah, yeah, and and also it goes to corporations. They're being tasked with creating more content too, creating more content with the same amount of people or less people as they if they trim staffs and everything. So they're facing the same challenges. To talk about something different, again, you were at IBC, you were in the vMix booth, and you've worked with them on this new software that I wanted to touch base on a little bit, and it's the Open Media Transport, which we talked about NDI. NDI is great, and OMT kind of comes as, I don't want to say it's not necessarily a competitor because NDI has 10 years of development behind it already, but OMT is offering a open source alternative that is enabling, offers the opportunity for those developing hardware and solutions to have a choice.
Yes, yes, certainly. So OMT was released about mid-August and then kind of publicly unveiled at IBC, as you mentioned. And it all stemmed from a desire to have a simple video over IP protocol that worked similarly to NDI, that was completely open source, because there is a big difference between a protocol that's, say, royalty free and one that's open source. So all the source code for Open Media Transport, it's on GitHub now. There's no taking it back, right? It's out there. It's in the public domain, and it's free for anyone to use.
And it's openmediatransport.org.
That's right. That's right. As part of that effort, vMix donated their vMix video codec to this, which it's a production tested protocol. It's been in vMix for maybe you could tell me 6 years or so.
It's a while. Yeah.
It's the backbone of vMix Replay. And as part of the effort, they donated that. They donated a very efficient, very pretty good on bandwidth codec to the project, and we find ourselves today. We've got Open Media Transport in the public domain. Anyone can implement it. It's simple, and support is growing. You've got central control, of course, vMix 29. There's an OBS plugin for input and output. SRT mini server. Sienna released a suite of, I'd say, feature comparable to their Sienna have got their great set of NDI tools for Mac. They've released a suite of tools. Pretty much every one of them accounted for on Mac for Open Media Transport, and they've also implemented it in their processing engine. So I'd say support is coming along nicely.
If you were to pick a hardware manufacturer who you would love to pick up OMT, who would you love to be the first one to jump on there?
Magewell. I think their converters are absolutely superb. And I would love to see something like the Pro Convert for Open Media Transport. I just, those units are rock solid. I've got a couple here. We support them, and they just never let me down. So I'd love to see them make a kind of OMT version of those products.
And I ask that because, as we know, Blackmagic has never jumped on the NDI bandwagon, even though there are other switchers, hardware and software switchers, that have jumped on the NDI I don't want to say bandwagon, or adopted NDI, I should say. And, who would be the first video hardware mixer to also say OMT is one of the ingest protocols? And it's like, oh, well, then, we would need a hardware converter like the Magewell, like you just said. And it's like, if we've got a hardware converter and we've got a switcher, now we've got the whole local area network taken care of.
Yeah, it's impossible to say. I don't. My personal view is I don't think it'll be Blackmagic, because they've done a lot of work on their 2110 stuff and their compressed 10G version of 2110. I think they're probably going to continue down that path, but we'll see.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think they have not done NDI for 10 years. And then when SMPTE 2110, came out as a released paper, they were right on it. So clearly they were working on that for some time, so that when it was, announced, ratified, it's like, yep, here it is, and it's delivered. So they've really staked their claim at the high end, the broadcast level. And hey, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. There's other tools. There's different tools for different markets. And I think, just to clarify for people who are viewing who haven't heard of OMT though, OMT is a great local area network tool, but it's also, I hope people don't confuse it and say, oh, so it's NDI. It's not NDI. It's very different. And one of the key things is it has the one codec, but it's not H.264 and it's not H.265.
Yes, and that all stems from the desire to keep it completely royalty-free. If you include those codecs in the SDK, they're licensable to someone. MPEG-LA, maybe NVIDIA, if you're using NVENC, you've got licenses to them. So it's just that desire to keep it completely royalty-free, and that's what they were going for with Open Media Transport.
And I think that's, that can be a challenge, but it doesn't stop, because it is, an open media system. Somebody like Osee could possibly adopt the technology and integrate it into their video mixers, and then you've got that end of the solution, because it's available. And so if there's somebody who sits there and says, well, listen, we've already got the NDI and we're paying for licensing on NDI with these switchers, if we do an OMT switcher, then we don't have to pay the licensing on that switcher, and the costs, change.
Yeah, it's that is true. It's there's two schools of thought on how to do it. You could do the decode encode in software. They actually demonstrated that very successfully on the vMix booth using nothing but a pair of Raspberry Pi 5s, one as encode, one as decode, all in software, nothing special, and it was solid at 1080/60. The other, the big discussion now, and you'll see it in the GitHub discussions, is how much would it cost to put this onto custom chips? And that's a big discussion point on the OMT GitHub at the moment. And I don't know the answer to that. I truly don't. But the thing about it is it's out there. It's in the codec is completely open source. You see how it works. So if someone wants to build that, hardware implementation of OMT, they absolutely could.
And this is basically the start of the discussion, though. This is not the end. This is not like this is OMT, take it or leave it. Because it's open source, there's so many doors available. Somebody could come and say, hell, listen, I have this other codec, and I don't know if there are other open source codecs, because I'm not in the authoring world. But if somebody wanted to do AV1 or something like that, and that became something that could be incorporated, or somebody else wanted to contribute an audio codec or an interoperability with Dante, and all of a sudden the feature set could really start to grow if other people were to contribute to the open source project.
Yeah, and that really is, you've summed up the beauty of having this as an open source protocol. It is out there, it's in the public domain. If a vendor starts implementing this and decides that, oh, this really could be improved, or this should be done slightly differently, they can make that change. And the hope is that they would push that change back to the main OMT code, because what you really don't want is a
dozen forks.
Yeah, and just different implementations out there in the world. That would not be a good time. But it's very early days. I myself can't comment on how it's going to pan out, but I'm very excited to support it in central control, and it's nice. It's an open source alternative to other protocols can only be good for all of us.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Raspberry Pis. I watched the end of IBC video with Martin and the vMix team, and he was just holding up this little box, and I'm like, that's no bigger than any other converter. It's not like it takes massive power or cooling or anything to be able to to do that.
That is, it's a point of the amount that he has optimized that codec is quite outstanding, and it's, you know, it's that I think got some people questioning, do we really need a hardware implementation? Like, this clearly is fast enough to run on. ARM CPUs are not getting slower. You know,
It's true.
Moore's law might be dead on desktop, but from what I'm seeing, ARM CPUs are still increasing in speed at a rapid rate of knots, and that for a codec like OMT is exciting.
And then there's also the chance like H.264 and things like that for a custom, you know, video chip to come in and say, I can do this, and I do this really, really efficiently. And then it takes the load off of the CPU.
Yes, that's true, and that it really is the key that's allowed a lot. I look around me and like all these PTZ cameras I have. That is how that's been possible, because these ARM SoCs all have invariably on the SoC they've got a H.264 encoder, and that can be leveraged, and that it is a great approach. AV1 certainly may play a part in the future of OMT, but it's you know, that's for the wider community to decide, I think, at this point.
Yeah, and you know, I was reading an article on AV1, which is another codec that's out there, and they're talking about AV2, and there's like, oh, AV2 is going to be more efficient, but it's also not backwards compatible. So you have to wait for dedicated silicon to go be distributed so that people actually can watch the content being created with that. And I'm just like, man, you know, it's like it's not unheard of to make new hardware to work with a specific codec.
It's true. It's completely true. I think the linchpin of that perhaps is that they have those chips on them, because, you know, your smartphone needs an H.264 HEVC encoder decoder, whereas, you know, those everyone's taking videos and playing videos on their phone, so these chips are not in the domain of being specialized hardware anymore, and that's why they're so prevalent. Something like OMT, I don't think that Qualcomm is ever going to release an SoC that has a vMix video codec encoder on the chip. AV1, it's only a matter of time until they do that. If not, I'm sure some phones do already.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, you know, being here at the early days, the actual release of OMT, it's really cool. I remember, you know, when I saw representatives from NewTek demoing the TriCaster Mini, and they were showing it off in, was it 2015, and they were talking about this new thing called NDI, and it was like you had to like really wrap your mind around it, and like, what are you talking about? How do you get video on Ethernet? That doesn't make any sense. You know, everything till that point had always been a dedicated cable that it was on, you know, other than, you know, because even web video at that point was not very big.
No, no, it's amazing, isn't it? You go back and look at the kind of live streaming productions from 10 years ago and think, oh man, is that really what it all looked like? Because
It's
at the time,
bad.
I was thinking, oh, the improvement in quality over the past few years is just incredible. And it probably was, but you look back now and it's, yeah, I couldn't have dreamed of being able to do 4K live streaming out of my spare bedroom 10 years ago. You know, it just wasn't a viable thing to consider. But yeah, it's everything's moving along nicely, I'd say. And being here at the start of OMT, it's greenfield land, you know. There's loads of exciting tools to be built.
It is indeed, and I appreciate the work that you've done on it, and you know, you and Martin have put that together, and it's out there, like you says,
It's
and
all him.
it's a foundation that others can use to build on top of, and you know, upgrade and improve. And I think that really does. It also, to an extent, lets the people from NDI, because NDI is not an independent organization. It's not an NDI organization. NDI is still part of NewTek, which is now Vizrt or VizRT, however you want to say it. It's owned by a company, you know, a company that is a for-profit company, owns the licenses to NDI. And, you know, they just recently, you know, changed the the licensing a little bit, and people had questions like, well, what does this mean? Do people who are making software now have to pay for, a license? And there was like questions. And I think even just the existence of OMT helps to give that, a little bit of pause. It's like, we can't do what we want anymore because, well, there's this other thing that people could turn to.
Yes, yes. I think it's public knowledge at this point. There were some concerns around NDI licensing. NDI listened, they reverted it. Everything is fine.
Yes.
We're not going to ditch NDI. I don't think anyone else is in favor of any other protocol. It's still got it.
And NDI still does 1,000 things,
100%. This is not a competitor to NDI. It's a simple means to transport video over IP that is free and open for everyone.
Right. And it offers something to creators, to programmers, and say, listen, I want to try something. I can give this a shot and it doesn't cost me anything. And you can build new tools and, see what comes of it.
Absolutely. It's always, like I said, it's always an exciting time when there's something new like this, because for someone like me, for other, small independent developers, there's always going to, as the protocol grows and adoption grows, there's going to be a demand for more and more interesting tools, and it's a great time to get involved in that.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really appreciate you being here. And once again, if you haven't already, you can go over to centralcontrol.io and take a look at the software there. And there's tons of information on and we did the demo early today. You can grab the scroll bar and go back. But thank you again for giving of your time today to tell us a little bit about Central Control for those who may not have heard about it, and for talking about OMT.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And for everyone who is new to StreamTek, I'd once again remind you that you can find everything you want over on the StreamTek YouTube channel. And if you were looking for information like we talked about the TriCaster, if you were looking for the TriCaster, you can type in TRICASTER, and you could find all the different content that I've created about the TriCaster right there. So it's a great resource if you're getting started in video production, in live streaming, recording, multi-camera, live switched, anything. It's a great resource where you can find many resources about many different hardware solutions, many different cameras, tutorials, and technology instruction as well. This is a great resource to look at. I also write for Streaming Media Magazine, so if you're looking for reviews and other information about the live streaming industry, you can go to streamingmedia.com. You can also find StreamTek on Facebook. I also run the B4 on Micro Four Thirds group on Facebook. That's for putting big broadcast ENG lenses on Micro Four Thirds cameras. And if you're looking to get started with an iPad and some iPhones or Android phones, Teradek released their AirMix software several years ago and made it freely available. There's a group I started for that, for people to support themselves, because Teradek is not officially supported anymore, but they did make it officially available with all the features unlocked. So you can go check that out as well. If you need to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at streamtek.us. So thank you again, everyone, for watching to today's show. Let's see, Meld Studios and OBS also in. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Just looking at the comments. For tuning in. My name is Anthony Barokas, the Chief Gearhead here at StreamTek, or actually on vacation. And